The screams pierced through the muggy August afternoon like broken glass against concrete. 8-year-old Marcus Williams pressed his face against the chain-link fence, his small hands gripping the metal wire as two uniformed officers dragged his friend Keisha toward a waiting patrol car. Her wheelchair had been abandoned on the basketball court, overturned in the chaos, its bright purple spokes spinning uselessly in the sun. "Please, she needs her medication." Sarah Chen, the camp director, ran after the officers, her voice cracking with desperation. "You can't just take her. Where are you taking them?" Officer Bradley ignored her pleas, his jaw set in grim determination as he lifted the crying 10-year-old girl. Keisha's cerebral palsy made her limbs rigid with fear, but he handled her like a piece of cargo rather than a terrified child. Behind him, his partner, Officer Martinez, guided 3 more children toward the vehicles, their eyes wide with confusion and terror. "This is insane," whispered Marcus's counselor, Janet Rodriguez, as she pulled him away from the fence. Her voice trembled with barely contained rage. "They're children. They're just children." The Harmony Grove Community Center had been a beacon of hope in the otherwise segregated suburb of Millfield Heights for exactly 67 days. Sarah had spent 2 years fighting for permits, fundraising, and building partnerships to create the only inclusive summer program in a 30-mile radius. Here, children with disabilities played alongside their typical peers. Here, kids from the lower-income neighborhoods across town mingled with those from the gated communities. Here, skin color mattered less than the color of your team jersey during Capture the Flag. But that was before Patricia Whitmore decided it needed to end. The morning had started like any other. Sarah arrived at 6:30 to unlock the community center, her coffee still steaming as she reviewed the day's activities. Swimming lessons for the mobility-impaired kids, art therapy sessions, and the weekly talent show rehearsal. 43 children were enrolled, ranging from age 6 to 16, representing every corner of Millfield Heights' diverse population. By 7:15, the first bus arrived. Children poured out in a rainbow of excited chatter and summer clothes. There was Devon, a 12-year-old with Down syndrome who never missed a day and always brought extra snacks to share. Anna and Sophia, identical twins from the Rodriguez family who switched between English and Spanish mid-sentence. Tyler, a 16-year-old who'd been aging out of other programs, but found his calling here as a junior counselor, especially gifted at connecting with kids who felt different or left out. Sarah watched them scatter across the facility with the satisfaction that came from seeing a dream realized. The pool area echoed with splashing and laughter. In the art room, finger paints created masterpieces that would never hang in galleries, but meant everything to the small artists who made them. The gymnasium hosted an impromptu dance party, wheelchairs spinning alongside sneakers on the polished floor. Ms. Sarah. Marcus had run up to her that morning, his face glowing with excitement. "Look what I made." He held up a friendship bracelet woven in purple and gold threads. "It's for Keisha. Purple's her favorite color, and she said gold reminds her of sunshine." Sarah had knelt to examine the bracelet, marveling at the careful craftsmanship from such small fingers. "She's going to love it, Marcus. You have such a kind heart." That bracelet now lay trampled in the dirt beside Keisha's overturned wheelchair. Patricia Whitmore had appeared at 11:47 a.m., precisely 13 minutes before lunch was scheduled to begin. Sarah recognized the woman immediately from the Homeowners Association meetings she'd been forced to attend during the permit process. Patricia was impossible to forget, always impeccably dressed, always carrying a leather-bound notebook, always speaking in the clipped tones of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ms. Chen." Patricia's voice had cut through the cheerful noise of the recreation room like a blade. We need to discuss some serious safety violations." Sarah had set down the craft supplies she'd been organizing and turned to face the woman. Something in Patricia's tone made her skin crawl, but she forced a professional smile. "Of course. What can I help you with, Mrs. Whitmore?" "This facility is operating outside the parameters of its permit." Patricia flipped open her notebook with theatrical precision. "The Homeowners Association has documented numerous violations of community standards and safety protocols." "I'm not sure what you mean. We've followed every guideline exactly as—" "The noise levels exceed acceptable limits." Patricia's finger traced down her list, like she was reading charges in a courtroom. "The bus traffic disrupts the peaceful enjoyment of residential properties. And frankly, this mixing of populations creates liability issues that put the entire community at risk." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Mixing of populations. These children clearly don't belong in this neighborhood. Patricia's mask slipped just enough to reveal the ugly truth beneath. "Some of them aren't even from our district. Others have conditions that require specialized facilities. This is a family community, Ms. Chen. We have standards to maintain." Sarah felt the blood rushing to her face. Around them, children continued to play, blissfully unaware that their joy was being measured and found wanting by a woman who saw them as problems to be solved rather than lives to be celebrated. "These children have every right to be here," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "Every permit is in order. Every safety requirement has been exceeded. Every child is properly supervised and—" "Not for much longer." Patricia snapped her notebook shut. "I've already contacted the appropriate authorities. This operation will be shut down immediately for the safety of everyone involved." That had been 23 minutes ago. Now police officers moved through the center like they were conducting a raid rather than dealing with a summer camp dispute. Sarah watched in horror as they separated children from counselors, paying no attention to the bonds that had formed over 2 months of shared experiences. "You can't do this," Dr. James Morrison, the camp's volunteer pediatrician, stepped between Officer Bradley and a group of younger children who had clustered together in fear. "Some of these kids have medical conditions. They need their medications, their routines. This is traumatic." "Step aside, sir." Bradley's hand moved to his belt, not quite touching his weapon, but making the threat clear. "We're following direct orders from the Homeowners Association. These children are being removed for their own safety." "Whose safety, Doctor?" Morrison demanded. "Look at them. They're terrified." Indeed, the children's faces told a story of confusion and betrayal. Devin stood in the corner, rocking back and forth in the self-soothing motion that helped him process overwhelming situations. The Rodriguez twins clung to each other, speaking rapid Spanish to their mother, who had arrived to pick them up early, only to find police cars in the parking lot. Tyler, the teenage junior counselor, had positioned himself protectively in front of a group of younger kids, his jaw set in defiance that reminded Sarah painfully of her own son at that age. "Tyler, honey," Sarah called out. "Go with Dr. Morrison. Okay, help him keep everyone calm." But Tyler shook his head. "No way. I'm not leaving them." His voice cracked with the effort of trying to sound braver than he felt. "This is wrong. Ms. Sarah. This is so wrong." Patricia watched the scene unfold from the safety of the parking lot, her arms crossed in satisfaction. She had positioned herself next to her pristine white BMW, close enough to oversee the operation, but far enough away to avoid any unpleasant interactions with the children she was having removed. "Ma'am." Officer Martinez approached her with obvious reluctance. Are you sure about this? These kids aren't doing anything wrong. They're just playing. Patricia's expression hardened. Officer, are you questioning the authority of the Homeowners Association? We have a responsibility to maintain property values and community standards. These children pose a clear and present danger to both. What danger? Martinez looked back at the playground where moments earlier, children had been playing an enthusiastic game of kickball. They're kids having fun. Look at the demographics. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper, but her words carried venom. Half of them don't even live in this zip code. They're being bussed in from who knows where. And the disabled ones, well, insurance companies exist for a reason. One accident, one lawsuit, and this entire community could be liable for millions. Martinez felt sick to his stomach, but orders were orders. The Homeowners Association held significant sway in local politics, and his sergeant had made it clear that cooperation was expected. Still, as he watched Keisha's face crumple in confusion when they lifted her from her wheelchair, he wondered if there were some orders that deserved to be disobeyed. The scene in the community center had devolved into chaos. Parents began arriving as word spread through social media and frantic phone calls. Maria Rodriguez burst through the front doors, her work uniform still on from her shift at the hospital, demanding to know why her daughters were being treated like criminals. "Where are you taking them?" she demanded in accented English, her voice rising with each word. "These are good children. They do nothing wrong." Behind her came David Williams, Marcus's father, still in his mechanic's coveralls. His face was a mask of controlled rage as he took in the scene. "This is about race, isn't it?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is about keeping our kids away from their precious neighborhood." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she watched families being torn apart by fear and prejudice disguised as policy. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she knew she couldn't give up. These children depended on her. Their families trusted her. The community that was slowly being built here, one friendship bracelet and shared lunch at a time, was worth fighting for. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. First to the camp's lawyer, then to the local news stations, then to every civil rights organization she could find in her contacts. If Patricia Whitmore wanted to make this a fight, Sarah was ready to give her one. By 2 p.m., the first news van arrived. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Amanda Stevens, had been following discrimination cases for 15 years, and something about Sarah's desperate phone call had triggered her instincts. She surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had witnessed injustice before, but the sight of children being separated from their caregivers still made her stomach turn. "Ms. Chen." Amanda approached Sarah as the camp director tried to comfort a group of remaining parents. "Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Sarah looked at the reporter with eyes red from crying and exhaustion. "They're destroying something beautiful. These kids, they don't see disability or race or economic status. They just see friends. And now they're being taught that those differences are threats to be eliminated." Amanda's cameraman captured the overturned wheelchair, the scattered art supplies, the Welcome All Children banner that now hung askew across the entrance. But more importantly, he captured the faces of the families, the confusion, the anger, the heartbreak of parents who had dared to believe their children could find acceptance in a world that constantly reminded them they were different. Patricia, sensing the changing tide, approached the news crew with her politician's smile firmly in place. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Millfield Heights Homeowners Association," she announced. "I want to make it clear that this action was taken purely for safety reasons. These children deserve proper care in facilities designed for their specific needs. And what specific needs are those? Amanda's question was sharp, professional. She had interviewed enough bigots to recognize the coded language. Well, children with disabilities require specialized equipment, trained medical staff, proper insurance coverage. Patricia's voice trailed off as she realized how hollow her words sounded when contrasted with the obvious care and joy that had been present just hours earlier. This camp has a licensed pediatrician on staff, Amanda countered. It's fully insured and has exceeded all safety requirements. So what's the real reason for shutting it down? Patricia's composure cracked slightly. Property values in this community are at stake. We have a responsibility to our residents to maintain certain standards. Standards that exclude disabled children and minorities. That's not... You're twisting my words. Patricia's face flushed red. This is about maintaining the character of our neighborhood. The interview, broadcast on the 6 o'clock news, sparked outrage across the city. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Let Them Play" and "Harmony Grove Strong." Parents from other districts began calling to ask how they could enroll their children. Disability rights advocates scheduled protests. Local politicians, sensing which way the wind was blowing, began distancing themselves from the Homeowners Association's actions. But the children who had been removed were still gone. That evening, Sarah sat in her empty office at the community center, surrounded by the remnants of the day's activities. A half-finished painting of a rainbow sat on the art table. Someone's forgotten lunchbox waited patiently by the door. The silence was deafening after months of constant laughter and chatter. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. Ms. Chen, this is Assistant Attorney General Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I've been following the situation at your camp with great interest. Sarah sat up straighter, her pulse quickening. Yes. Based on the evidence we've reviewed, including today's news coverage and witness statements, we believe there may be grounds for a federal civil rights investigation. The actions taken by the Homeowners Association appear to constitute discrimination based on race and disability status, which violates several federal laws. For the first time since the morning's nightmare began, Sarah felt a spark of hope. What does that mean? It means the full weight of the federal government is now focused on Millfield Heights. We'll be filing emergency motions tomorrow morning to halt any further interference with your program. And, if our investigation confirms what we suspect, the Homeowners Association could face significant federal penalties. The news broke at 6 a.m. the next morning. DOJ files federal civil rights lawsuit against Millfield Heights, HOA, scrolled across every major news network. The story had national implications. A federal government willing to intervene when local authorities fail to protect vulnerable children from discrimination. Patricia Whitmore woke to find news vans lining her perfectly manicured street. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and increasingly angry neighbors who were learning that their community was now synonymous with child discrimination on the national stage. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing her most professional suit and practicing her talking points in the mirror. But when she opened her front door to face the media circus, she found herself confronted not just with cameras and microphones, but with something far more unsettling: the moral weight of her actions made visible. Channel 7 had put together a montage of the previous day's events, showing the terror in children's faces as they were separated from their friends and caregivers. The segment featured interviews with parents, medical professionals, and disability advocates, all speaking with unified outrage about the trauma inflicted on innocent children. But most damaging was the interview with Keisha herself. The 10-year-old, speaking from her family's modest apartment across town, described the camp in terms that would have melted any heart not hardened by prejudice. "It was the first place I ever felt normal," she said, her voice small but clear. "Nobody stared at my wheelchair. Nobody treated me different. Marcus made me a friendship bracelet because he said I was his best friend. I never had a best friend before." The reporter's final question was devastating in its simplicity. "Would you like to go back to camp?" "More than anything," Keisha replied. "But they said kids like me aren't allowed anymore." The video went viral within hours. By noon, the federal courthouse in downtown Millfield was packed beyond capacity. Judge Morrison, no relation to the camp's volunteer doctor, had agreed to hear emergency motions from both sides. The Department of Justice had assembled a team of civil rights attorneys who arrived with boxes of evidence documenting not just yesterday's events, but a pattern of discriminatory behavior by the Homeowners Association dating back years. Patricia sat at the defendant's table with two expensive lawyers who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. What had seemed like a simple property dispute the day before was now revealed as something far more sinister, a systematic effort to exclude undesirable residents and their children from community facilities. The DOJ's lead attorney, Michael Harrison, presented his case with surgical precision. "Your Honor, the evidence shows a clear pattern of discrimination based on race and disability status. The defendants have used their authority to systematically exclude minority children and children with disabilities from community programs, violating both the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act." He presented emails Patricia had sent to other board members, referring to the camp children as that element, and discussing ways to maintain demographic consistency in community programs. He showed footage from security cameras proving that the children had been engaged in normal recreational activities when police arrived to remove them. Most damning. He presented testimony from several homeowners association members who were willing to state under oath that Patricia had specifically targeted the camp because of its inclusive policies. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the association was simply enforcing legitimate safety concerns. But Judge Morrison was having none of it. "Counselor," the judge interrupted, "I've reviewed the safety inspection reports. This facility exceeded all requirements by significant margins. The only safety issue I can identify is the safety these children felt from discrimination, which your client apparently found intolerable." The courtroom was filled with families from the camp, disability advocates, and community members who had driven from across the state to show support. When Judge Morrison announced his decision, the silence was absolute. "The court finds sufficient evidence of ongoing civil rights violations to warrant immediate federal intervention," he declared. "The Homeowners Association is hereby enjoined from interfering with the operation of the Harmony Grove Community Center camp in any way. Furthermore, this court is placing the Millfield Heights Homeowners Association under federal supervision, pending a full investigation by the Department of Justice." The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Sarah felt years of stress and fear drain from her body as she realized the children would be coming home. But the judge wasn't finished. "Ms. Whitmore," he continued, his voice stern, "you are personally ordered to attend sensitivity training and community service at the very facility you attempted to shut down. Perhaps spending time with these remarkable children will help you understand the harm your prejudices have caused." Patricia's face went white. The prospect of having to face the children she had traumatized, to acknowledge their humanity and worth, terrified her more than any legal penalty. The next morning, buses once again pulled up to the Harmony Grove Community Center. But this time, they were escorted by federal marshals ensuring safe passage. News crews captured the emotional reunions as children ran to embrace counselors and friends they hadn't seen in 3 terrible days. Marcus still had Keisha's friendship bracelet in his pocket, somehow undamaged despite everything that had happened. When he saw her wheelchair rolling off the bus, he ran toward her with tears streaming down his face. "I kept it safe for you," he said, carefully tying the purple and gold threads around her wrist. "I knew you'd come back." Keisha's smile was radiant. "I never stopped believing we'd be together again. Best friends forever, right?" "Forever and always," Marcus agreed. Sarah watched the reunion from the community center steps, her heart full for the first time in days. "Doctor?" Morrison stood beside her, shaking his head in amazement. "You know what the most incredible thing is," he said. "These kids aren't angry. After everything they've been through, they're just happy to be together again." Tyler, the teenage counselor, approached them with a group of younger children in tow. "Ms. Sarah, can we have an extra long art session today? I want to make welcome back cards for everyone." "Of course, honey. Today we celebrate being a family again." The federal supervision of the Homeowners Association brought swift changes to Millfield Heights. Discriminatory policies that had been in place for years were struck down. Community facilities were opened to all residents regardless of race, economic status, or ability. Property managers who had enforced unofficial segregation policies found themselves facing federal investigations. Patricia Whitmore's court-ordered community service began the following week. She arrived at the camp with obvious reluctance, her lawyer-approved statement of contrition sounding hollow and rehearsed. But children have a way of seeing through adult pretenses to the humanity beneath. Devin, the 12-year-old with Down syndrome, was the first to approach her. "Hi, Mrs. Lady," he said with his characteristic directness. "Are you here to play with us?" Patricia looked down at the boy, seeing for the first time not a problem to be managed, but a child eager for connection. I don't know how to play," she admitted, the words catching in her throat. "That's okay," Devin said, taking her hand with complete trust. "I'll teach you. Playing is easy when you have friends." Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Patricia, forced to spend hours each day at the camp, began to see the children as individuals rather than statistics. She watched Anna and Sofia Rodriguez help younger kids with their English homework, switching seamlessly between languages to make sure everyone understood. She saw Tyler's patience as he worked with children who struggled with confidence, never making them feel rushed or inadequate. She witnessed Keisha's infectious laughter when she won the wheelchair basketball tournament, her disability becoming just another variation in the beautiful diversity of childhood. Most surprisingly, she began to understand Sarah's vision for the camp. This wasn't just a place to keep children occupied during summer vacation. It was a laboratory for the future, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where children learned to see ability rather than disability, similarity rather than otherness. One afternoon, while helping Devin with a craft project, Patricia found herself crying. Not the bitter tears of defeat, but the cleansing tears of recognition. She had spent so much energy protecting a world that didn't actually need protection, fighting threats that existed only in her own prejudices. "Mrs. Patricia," Devin looked up from his gluing with concern. "Are you sad?" "No, sweetie," she managed to say. "I'm not sad. I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry." Devin considered this, with the wisdom that children with developmental disabilities often possess about human emotions. "It's okay to be sorry," he said. "But being sorry is only the first part. The second part is being better." By the end of the summer, the Harmony Grove Community Center had become more than just a camp. It had become a symbol. Delegations visited from other communities, seeking to replicate its inclusive model. Researchers studied its approaches to integrated recreation. Policymakers held it up as an example of what was possible when legal mandates aligned with moral imperatives. The final day of camp was bittersweet. Children who had grown closer than siblings over the summer faced the reality of returning to schools where they might not see each other until the following year. But the bonds formed at Harmony Grove proved stronger than institutional separation. Marcus and Keisha's families had become close friends, arranging weekend playdates and holiday celebrations. The Rodriguez twins had started a bilingual tutoring program at their school, inspired by their camp experience of helping others learn. Tyler had decided to study special education in college, determined to create more spaces where every child could belong. Patricia Whitmore attended the end-of-summer celebration, not as court-ordered community service, but as someone who had discovered what community actually meant. She had submitted her resignation from the Homeowners Association Board and was working with federal authorities to implement lasting reforms in local housing policies. During the closing ceremony, Sarah stood before the assembled families and reflected on the journey they had all taken together. "This summer, we learned that love is stronger than fear," she said. "We learned that children don't see the differences that adults use to divide us. We learned that inclusion isn't just about being kind, it's about being human." She looked out at the faces before her children and parents, counselors and volunteers, former opponents who had become allies, and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work that matters. "Next summer, we'll be back," she continued, "and the summer after that, and every summer until no child in our community has to wonder whether they belong, whether they're welcome, whether they're enough exactly as they are." The applause was thunderous, but it was the small gestures that mattered most. Devin hugging Patricia without hesitation, Marcus and Keisha making plans for their friendship bracelet business, Tyler already designing activities for next year's program, the Rodriguez family teaching other parents basic Spanish phrases so everyone could communicate better. 6 months later, the Department of Justice released its final report on the Millfield Heights investigation. The Homeowners Association was fined $2.3 million for civil rights violations, with the money designated for expansion of inclusive programming throughout the region. 3 other HOAs in surrounding communities were found to have similar discriminatory policies and placed under federal oversight. More importantly, the Harmony Grove Community Center was designated as a model program for inclusive recreation, ensuring federal funding and support for years to come. Applications for the following summer already numbered in the hundreds, with requests coming from families across the state who had heard about the place where every child belonged. On a cold February morning, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in purple and gold threads, along with a note written in careful cursive. "Dear Ms. Sarah, I learned to knit this winter because I wanted to make something beautiful for you. Thank you for showing me that different doesn't mean wrong, and that the best communities are the ones where everyone has a place. I can't wait for summer. Love." Keisha and Marcus helped with the spelling. Sarah wrapped the scarf around her neck and walked outside to survey the community center grounds. Snow covered the playground equipment, but she could already envision the return of warm weather, the sound of children's laughter, the daily miracles that happened when artificial barriers dissolved in the face of genuine human connection. The legal victory had been important, but the real triumph was quieter and more lasting. It lived in the friendship between a boy who learned to see past disability and a girl who discovered she was more than her wheelchair. It grew in the family dinners where Spanish and English mixed freely around tables set for newfound friends. It flourished in the heart of a woman who had learned that the community she was trying to protect had never actually been threatened, only her narrow vision of what community could be. As Sarah headed back inside to begin planning for the upcoming summer, she carried with her the certain knowledge that some victories extend far beyond the courtroom. They live in the moment when a child realizes they belong, when a family finds their tribe, when a community chooses love over fear. They endure in the simple truth that every child deserves a place to grow, to play, to be celebrated for exactly who they are. The Harmony Grove Community Center would open its doors again in June, and when it did, it would welcome not just returning campers, but new children who had heard about the magical place where differences were treasures rather than obstacles. The purple and gold friendship bracelets had become symbols worn proudly throughout the community, marking not just individual friendships, but collective commitment to a more inclusive future. In the end, Patricia Whitmore's attempt to preserve an exclusive community had created something far more valuable, a truly inclusive one. The children she had tried to exclude had taught an entire town about the strength that comes from diversity, the joy that multiplies when shared across all boundaries, and the simple revolutionary act of choosing to see each other as fully, completely, beautifully human. Summer would come again, and with it, the laughter of children who knew they belonged.